Welcome to SysEng Quick. My name is John. In the previous video, we started work on a project to build a Proxmox virtual machine that will act as a NAT router and container host. We created a collection to build the VM and used it to create a new host running Fedora 40. It was largely a proof of concept. Almost every value was hard-coded, which doesn't make for a very reusable collection, and certainly nothing I would care to publish right now. Today, we'll spend some time refactoring the collection to increase its reusability. We'll provide defaults where they make sense, make sure values are validated, and try to make the collection as easy to use as possible. Before we get started, I wanted to offer a quick thank you to David McComb. He released a video on his channel that I saw recently, which had a very clever solution to a problem I encountered when using the Proxmox API. In my HA Kubernetes cluster video, I wrote some Ansible plays to build Proxmox VMs, but they were much more complex than the ones we wrote in the last video. David's solution let me simplify the plays significantly, which is part of the reason why I decided to incorporate them into this project. I'll leave a link in the description to his video. Okay, let's get started. I want to mention a couple small changes I made between videos. So, we have changed the inventory to be the inventory directory. This way, Ansible will merge all the inventory files it finds in this directory, and I don't have to switch back and forth between the ATH inventory and the Proxmox inventory. Speaking of inventories, in the ATH inventory, I made a change to our jump host flags. I got rid of the -j option and replaced it with the proxy command. It's a lot more complicated, but there is one advantage to this method that you can't get with this method. When you're using the host key checking option, Ansible can't apply that to your proxy host, only to host it connects to directly. Ansible doesn't know we're doing this, so it has no idea it needs to add these flags, which is basically what it's doing when you do host key checking equals false. So we could get rid of this entirely and add a few more options here and make this very explicit, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it the way it is. Effectively, what we're saying is the proxy command simply uses SSH, and we turn off host key checking and then tell it to use a non-existent host file so it won't write any keys it finds to any known host file. And then we say we're going to use the host and port, and here is our host that we connect to. So this is a bit nicer in not being prompted for host keys when using Ansible. Let's add our new proxy server to our inventory before we start making changes. So I'm going to add a new group. This will be my PVE group because this is not an LXC container, it's an actual VM. So I'll say there's some children groups under there, and I'll put in a proxy group. And I want to add a host, and the host is proxy ATH local.plaza.net. Okay, there is our group. We need to apply this Ansible user here as well. We could duplicate the vars down here, or actually, our proxy group is defined here and here, so it will merge the groups into a single group. There can only be one proxy group. So if I define it here and here, then this host is also in this group. So actually, we would already inherit this variable. But I don't want to do that because we're going to eventually remove this host. Let's go ahead and add the all group explicitly in here, and we'll say that there are children groups under that. We'll put both of these as children. Now I'll take this vars section and I'll make it a child of vars, a child of all, rather than a child of the LXC group. Okay, that looks pretty good. We've got our PVE group, we've got our Ansible user, we've got our LXC group, we've got our two proxy hosts. Let's go see if we can ping our PVE host. We'll go to the command line, we'll do Ansible, the ping module, and I'll say PVE hosts. I'll bet you didn't expect to see two hosts returning a response. Yeah, me either. I often forget about that property, even though I just told you that it was going to merge the groups and we would have inherited this variable. Hey, if this group is a child of this group, and this group got merged, does that mean this host is a child of the PVE group? Yes, it does. So the group merging behavior can be a little bit complex if you're not expecting it, especially when you define things in multiple places. So you have to watch out for things like that. So I don't actually need this proxy group to be defined for this host. So for now, let's just go ahead and remove that, and we'll put this host section as a child of LXC and not have a proxy group up here. Let's go back to the terminal and run ping again. There we go, a single proxy host in the PVE group, which is what we want to happen. The last time we ran this playbook, we had variables all over the place. There are role defaults. We overrode one in the playbook here, and we specified not one, but two separate vars files on the command line. I don't like any of that. It makes the playbook unnecessarily complicated to run, and also it reduces reusability. I don't want to download a collection and then be forced to change the collection to use it. No, I should be specifying my variables to this collection. So why don't we do that? First of all, we're going to go ahead and comment this out temporarily because we don't want to supply any vars inside this playbook. This playbook is for the collection. You supply the variables you want it to have. Let's go make another playbook that will run this playbook. So down in our tutorial collection, in our playbooks, we're going to make a new one called Create PVE Host. Now, I obviously don't want to copy all of this code into our new playbook. That wouldn't be very reusable at all, having everything be duplicated. So there is another way we can run a play, or rather a playbook, inside another playbook. So you've seen how we have an array of plays, and we have tasks, but there are other keywords we can use instead. So let's go ahead and use one of those. So first, we're going to name this because we need to name everything in this array. So we're going to run the create cloud VM playbook. And then rather than supply task or host or gather facts, we're going to do import playbook because this will let us import an entire playbook and run everything inside there. And then we're going to say what playbook we want to run. And it's going to be sysengquick.proxmox.createCloudVM. To specify our vars, we can simply supply a var section right here. So that variable we had over here, we can just cut that out, put it over here, and uncomment that. And there we go. We have now overridden that variable right here. And that's a lot nicer than placing it in an extra variables file and supplying it on the command line. Okay, so let's run our new playbook. It is sysengquick tutorial create PVE host. And then we still need our extra vars for now. So let's see how this works. Okay, yeah, everything looks like it still works just fine. So we haven't made any changes, and our playbook is a lot more reusable because now no one needs to change the playbook in the collection. They just write their own, import that playbook, and supply the variables they want to change. If they don't want to change anything else, they can simply run the playbook like we did in the last video. But you'll almost certainly want to supply some of your own variables, like we're doing on the command line right now with our extra variables file. Let's see what we can do about removing those extra vars files. The API YAML vars should be pretty easy to fix. We'll simply move this data into our vars section. After all, it's really not much harder to edit them here in this vars section than it is in the API file. So we're not getting much benefit having this file be separate from this playbook, which only exists to supply extra vars anyway. This one will be a bit trickier though. We've got this giant block of Ansible encrypted text. What are we going to do with it? Well, obviously I can't just copy this data over here. That wouldn't work. But we can read this data. So why don't we do that instead? First, if we decrypt the data, you'll see we've got this top level vault key. Let's go ahead and make that a key under my vars over here. And then we'll remove the top level key. And what I'd like to do is take this data here and place it under this key. So let's go ahead and re-encrypt this. And then we'll go back to our host. And I want to look up the data that's over here. So we'll create a Jinja expression, and we'll use the lookup plugin, Ansible built-in file, and we'll give it the path to our file, vars vault proxmox.yaml. Next, we need to decrypt this block of text into a YAML file. So we'll use the Ansible built-in unvault plugin. So Ansible built-in unvault, and it requires a parameter for a vault ID. We don't have a vault ID, so it doesn't matter what you put as a string here. I'm going to put vault, but again, we're not using a vault ID, so this string does not matter. But it is a required parameter, so you have to supply something. Now that we've got a block of YAML, we need to convert this into a dictionary. So we can do that by saying from YAML to turn our YAML structure into an Ansible dictionary. Let's go ahead and see if this works. We'll go to the command line and we'll try to run our playbook. And this time we don't need to supply any of the extra vars files. It does give us an error though. It says we couldn't access this file. File not found. Did I typo it? Well, let's go ahead and copy this, paste it over here, and no, I did not typo it. So what's going on there? Well, unfortunately, the lookup plugin is using a relative path here. Now, where is this path relative to? Well, clearly, it's not this home directory, so where would it actually be? Well, it's actually in the playbook directory. Now, you might think that means it's in a directory relative to this folder, the playbooks for our current collection. After all, that's the playbook we're in, right? Well, no, it's not. We're in this playbook, so it's in the vars folder inside this playbook folder. That's a problem because the whole point of making this reusable was to not change anything about this collection. I don't want to add a vars file here either. So what can we do instead? Well, my plan is to look up the playbook folder for this folder and then assign that. So we're going to need to supply a variable here to find my file. So let's go ahead and say that this is going to be the vault file path, and then I need to find that somehow. So we can actually take advantage of using another play to look that up. If we had another play, it would be in this playbook folder. So we could find the playbook folder and then append our path to that. So let's go ahead and do that. Look up vault file path. Our hosts are going to be localhost. We're not going to gather facts. And for our task, we're going to do one task. Register the vault file path. We can use the setFact module to do that. So vault file path, that's going to be equal to the playbook directory, which is playbook dir. It's a top-level Ansible variable that is always defined to be the directory that your playbook is in. And then we'll simply put vars vault proxmox.yaml. So let's start by making sure we have the right file path. So in tutorial playbook vars vault, yes, there's already an old Proxmox YAML file in here, so we can copy that new one over here. If it hadn't been here, we'd have to do something else. So let's go ahead and go back to our file. We'll grab our data, and then I'll go up here to this folder, and we'll copy over our data that's been dedented. Okay, that should be good now. So let's see if our playbook runs now. And it still doesn't. What's happening now? Well, it says vault file path is undefined. Wait a minute. Didn't we just register this fact using setFact? Why isn't this variable the same as this variable? It's because this global variable is only registered on this play, not in this new playbook over here. However, we can still make use of it because this was still registered as a fact with our localhost, and we can access that in this other play. We simply need to do host vars, localhost, and then the variable, which is vault file path. Okay, let's try that. Hey, that looks better. And you can see everything is still working properly. We still have access to all our data, our Proxmox user and everything else that we had in our vault. So now we've removed the need to supply any vault files. Now, of course, this all is a bit convoluted, but I'm hoping that we eventually replace this and this with a hashicorp vault lookup, and that will simplify the process immensely. So that's the roadmap. But for now, we don't have to do anything on the CLI other than run our playbook. So that's a lot nicer from a usability perspective. Before we move on, I want to clear up a mistake I made in the first video. I set the destination for the cloud image to be the folder, not the full path. And if you do that, it doesn't know what the file is, so it has to download it and then run the checksum, instead of running the checksum against the file and then deciding whether or not to download it. This was running very slow, and I wasn't sure why. It seemed like it was downloading this over and over again. And even though it didn't change anything, it still had to download it without the full path. So I have fixed this, but just note that was a mistake in the first video. I was going to start in on the argument spec for one of the roles, but after I made the first segment, I realized the video would be way too long. So I think I'm going to cut things here for today. We'll come back next time and do more work on the refactoring. I hope that you found today's video helpful. If you did, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. It helps out the channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time.